Story recapped here. Today I'm going to explain a drama, sci-fi, and horror show called The Twilight Zone: Not All Men. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. Despite being in the company for only 2 months, Annie Miller accepts a new task that her supervisor dumps on her. Her workmate, Dylan, advises her to say no to the tasks, but she feels uncomfortable about refusing since they might think she isn't a team player. Dylan then mentions a meteor shower tonight, but Annie notes she's too busy to watch it. However, Dylan tempts her by offering to cook a fancy dinner while they watch a meteor shower. Annie hesitates, but she says yes anyway. That night, Annie shows up for her date with Dylan. As they talk over a glass of wine, the meteor shower starts, so Dylan invites Annie to join him on the balcony. Just then, one meteor hits a water tower, so they check it out. After a few minutes, they successfully find the meteorite in a puddle filled with a red substance. Dylan picks it up, and Annie wants to hold it too, but he teases that it might have space germs. They return to Dylan's house, where Dylan confesses his admiration for her. Shortly after, things escalate, and they kiss. However, Dylan's getting a little too touchy, and Annie politely stops him. He tries to woo her again by noting how magical the night is, so they shouldn't let it go to waste. Annie ends up accepting his kisses again, but when his hands continue to wander, she gets up and insists on going home. Dylan gets pissed and gaslights her into thinking that he never had any intentions of hooking up. Just then, he grabs her arms forcefully, scaring her. To appease him, she tells him that there's no rush since they work together and will see each other again while backing away. This seems to convince him, so Dylan eventually concedes and apologizes. However, when Annie leaves, she hears him lashing out and breaking things in his house. Frightened, she hurriedly leaves. The next day, Annie notices a bruise on her arm, certain that it's from Dylan's grip from the night before. She goes to work troubled, and it doesn't help when her supervisor, Phil, tells her to brief Dylan about her task and turn it over to him. Annie tries to assure him that she can handle things on her own, but Phil points out that Dylan is appointed to manage the lab analysis and has been in the field longer. He advises her to stick with Dylan and study what he does so she'd move up the company faster. With that off her plate, Phil reminds her to attend her sister's birthday party later that night. As the day progresses, Annie keeps thinking about what happened. While leaving her yoga classes that afternoon, she notices the aggressive behavior of the men around her. One man slips his hand into his companion's back pocket. Another repeatedly forces his trunk close, while another shouts at her, hurrying her to get out of the parking lot. This starts to get in her head and makes her panic. After this, she drives to her sister's house but sits back to calm herself. Suddenly, someone taps on her window, and she finds her nephew, Cole. Cole points out that she's acting weird, but she explains that she was just taking a moment. As they walk to the house, he talks about the meteor shower, but Annie hints about her failed date. Cole sympathizes with her and offers to kick the guy's butt. When Annie asks why men like kicking butts, he replies that that's just the way they are. The family gets together at dinner with Annie's sister, Martha, and her husband, Mike, along with Phil and his wife. Annie gives Martha a skillet as a gift, which sparks a story about Mike's cooking. Though everyone enjoys the story, Annie seems to feel left out. Her sister then shifts the conversation to her and her new job, so Phil praises her for her performance at work. He also mentions that he's pairing her with the best project manager in the company, Dylan. Because of Annie's awkward response to this, Cole realizes that Dylan is the guy she went on a date with. Suddenly, someone curses out loud from the other house. Everyone goes out to check what's happening and finds a neighbor angrily fixing his lawnmower because the kid he hired didn't mow their lawn. Since his lawnmower got tangled with the garden hose, the water seeps out, causing an awful stench. The neighbor says that the whole town is suffering from the dirty water, but the authorities say that it's harmless. Seeing this, Annie remembers the red substance from the meteorite, which looks similar to the water spilling on the lawn. The ladies can't tolerate the horrible smell, so they go elsewhere. The ladies head to the bar, and once again, Annie fades into the background as Martha's friend recounts a daring, intimate encounter with her husband. Suddenly, their attention turns to a couple of men by the counter who are getting rowdy. Martha and her friends recognize her high school batchmate, Zeke, who used to be bullied. It seems like he's still stuck in that role since his friends are forcing him to drink from a glass with a piece of meteorite inside. Martha then spots Dylan on the other side of the room, and Annie tries to dodge his gaze. Misinterpreting her expression, Martha teases her that Dylan is hot, so he and Annie would make a good pair. Feeling awkward, Annie excuses herself. Outside, as she's preparing to smoke, she catches Cole with his boyfriend Steve, carrying a box of liquor. Since she's caught red-handed with a cigarette, she assures them that she won't tell if they don't. She advises against drinking at the bar, so Steve shares that they'll hang out at his dad's boat instead. When Annie returns, she finds that the guys are still rowdy at the bar. She wonders why they're being harsh, and Martha says it's just men being men. The bartender decides that Zeke has had enough to drink, but Zeke throws money at his face, urging him to pour another drink. Still, the bartender declines, so Zeke smashes a glass. Seeing this, Annie gets up and initiates to leave. Just then, Zeke explodes in rage, and his eyes become bloodshot red. He attacks the men around him, while others barge in to join the fight. In a short time, all the men start beating each other up, so Martha and Annie duck out of the bar. Outside, a guy named Perry recognizes Annie from work, but she's too focused on leaving and barely pays attention to him. The guy gets pissed by this, so he yells and curses at her for ignoring him. During the drive back home, they try to process what just happened when Annie notices that a man on a motorcycle is trailing them. She believes that it's Perry, so they take several turns, confirming that he is following them. Because of this, they take more turns until Perry loses sight of them. When the coast is clear, Annie rambles about something happening to the men in their town, like the men at the bar and Dylan from the night before. Hearing this, Martha gets shocked that Dylan attacked her. Annie stammers, trying to excuse that she gave confusing vibes. She stops the car in front of Martha's house and tries to tell the whole story, though she's still processing what happened. Hearing this, Martha sympathizes with her, sharing how before she met Mike, she had a lot of bad dates too. She advises Annie not to carry everything on her own, and Annie thanks her sister for her concern. While waiting for the automated gate to open, Annie shares her theory that the meteors caused the men to become violent. This sounds crazy to Martha, but Perry suddenly appears in the street, so they drive the car inside and rush out. Perry drives in before they can close the gate, so they head straight for the door and get inside the house. Mike greets them and asks what's going on. Panicked, Martha tells him that a man followed them, and he's outside now. She believes that they must call the cops, but Mike is determined to face the threat himself. When Martha opposes, he yells at her and leaves the house, much to Annie's surprise. Worried, Annie goes to the window to see how Mike handles the situation. What she finds is Mike brutally beating Perry up, so she tells Martha to call 911. Annie continues observing the events while Martha's on the phone, though the line is oddly busy. Suddenly, they hear Perry scream, and Annie backs away from the window. Seeing her expression, Martha asks what happened, but instead, Annie quickly locks the door. She then tells Martha that they must leave through the back door because Mike has turned like the others. Just then, Mike starts banging on the door, and Martha insists that her husband is okay, so she hurries to open the door for him. Annie tries to stop her sister, but she opens the door anyway, only to find no one outside. Terrified, Annie closes the door, when suddenly, Mike calls out to them from behind, having gone inside from the back door. The sisters follow him to the kitchen, and he proudly claims that it felt good to let Perry have it. As he turns around, Annie's eyes widen upon seeing his blood-stained shirt. Mike then lights up the candles on a cake, singing the happy birthday song for Martha with a sinister look on his face. As he does this, Martha and Annie freeze in fear, knowing that there's a knife inches away from him. After he finishes singing, he grabs the knife and tells Martha to blow out the candles and make a wish. When Martha doesn't act right away, Mike loses his patience and raises his voice at her. Because of this, Martha tries to blow the candles from where she's standing, but it doesn't work, so Mike orders her to come closer. Forced to do so, Martha successfully blows out the candles. Seeing that he's about to use the knife, Annie tells Mike that they should probably wait for Cole. However, this only angers him, and he claims that they're being ungrateful after he just saved them earlier. Martha tells him that he doesn't have to yell, but this only makes things worse. Mike calls them out for drinking at a bar together, as if they were asking someone to follow them. Martha tries to defend what they did, but Mike gets angry about her interrupting him. As he rants about how much he hates her, Mike fumes in anger, and his eyes become bloodshot red. Annie attempts to point out Mike's condition, but he accuses them of wanting Perry to follow them. Annie replies that it's not the case, which triggers Mike to scream at her, saying he's talking to his wife. Suddenly, Mike chases her with a knife, and Annie runs for it. He catches her and chokes her, so Martha uses a pan to knock him unconscious. Everything is overwhelming for Martha, but Annie urges her to leave immediately. Realizing her son isn't there, Martha insists on getting Cole first, so Annie tells her that he's at the docks. As they get to the car, they run across Perry's dead body, which they avoid out of fright. As they pull out of the driveway, another car crashes into theirs. Thankfully, Annie and Martha are safe, but the person who crashed into them died. Just then, a woman walks past them, all bloody and dazed. With their car damaged, Annie and Martha decide to hike toward the docks. As they get to the town, they discover that everything's on fire and the people have gone absolutely mad. Some men are killing each other, others are shooting guns in the air, and others are destroying cars. As they make their way through this chaos, a guy from work calls Annie, but another man smashes his head with a flail, making the sisters scream. While escaping the chaos, Phil calls out to them and assures them that he didn't contract what the others have. He claims that it's not all men and is probably caused by a hormonal imbalance. However, as he explains further, his voice changes, and Annie and Martha get rattled by it. Concluding that he's affected too, the two women run as other men pile up to beat up Phil. The sisters seek refuge in a gasoline station, terrified by what the town has come to. Martha believes that they have to fight back, so she takes one of the meteors, hoping that she'll contract the sickness and get stronger like the men. However, it doesn't work, so Annie concludes that only men are vulnerable to it. Suddenly, a large man chases them out of the station with a weapon made from a meteorite. As they rush out of town, they come across a bunch of men bathing in a fountain of red water. While the others bask in it, some are also shoveling more meteorites for them to enjoy. Meanwhile, Cole and Steve hang out on a boat, oblivious to what's happening in town. Steve shows off to Cole by doing push-ups, then returns to his beer, drinking it from his glass with the meteorite inside. He urges Cole to do the same since it'll make him stronger too, but he refuses. To convince him, Steve kisses him, but Cole pulls away because he feels uncomfortable. This continuous rejection triggers Steve, and his eyes begin to turn red. Annie and Martha finally arrive at the docks and run into Cole, who managed to escape by locking Steve in the boat. Cole tearfully explains that Steve went crazy, so they assure him that it's not his fault because the meteorite is causing it. Suddenly, they hear someone singing a love song. Dylan approaches them, carrying a chain with a large meteorite attached to it. In his most unhinged state, he claims that he had magic with Annie last night, then starts swinging his weapon, demanding why Annie doesn't like him. He then rushes at her and chokes her with a chain. Cole tries to stop him, but he easily gets shoved into a corner. The encounter triggers something in Cole, and he begins to stiffen and roar. Martha desperately tries to calm her son while Annie fights for her life. A helicopter appears above them, distracting Dylan, so she hits his leg and frees herself. Immediately, she hits Dylan with a meteorite weapon twice and pushes him into the water. With a chain wrapped around his waist, the weight of the meteorite drags Dylan to the ocean floor. After this, Annie signals the helicopter while Martha successfully helps Cole calm down. Soon, the helicopter descends and a rescue team arrives. Later, they are held inside a quarantine tent, where Annie overhears two female doctors discussing how the virus affected the town's water supply. Cole is soon released and approaches her and Martha, noting that his blood was taken for tests, but he seems to be fine. However, he reveals that he had a meteorite in his back pocket the whole time. This leads Annie to realize that not all men are affected by this so-called virus. The meteorites never caused anything because they are mere placebos. Cole strengthens her theory by revealing that he controlled his rage just by choosing to do so. As they leave, a soldier asks them to present their IDs before they can exit. When the soldier looks at Annie, he tells her that she'd look cuter if she smiled more. Learning from how her passiveness oppressed her, Annie firmly says no and takes her ID. After they leave, the news plays on the television, covering the events of that night, which they claim to be simple road rage. On that chaotic night, Annie found herself in the center of a mysterious and violent epidemic. What she encountered was no material disease, but a plague of consciousness, one that gave men permission to ignore decency, consent, and fear. All it took was a few little rocks to turn these men into monsters.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.